All right, I want to continue the sugya of heart transplants that we started last week. Last week, I think we really zeroed in on Reb Moshe's evolution, how Reb Moshe got to the position that he got to, where it seems that at the end of Reb Moshe's life, he was allowing people to do heart transplants and certifying that brain death is called brain death. Now, obviously, there's many Gedolei Poskim contemporaries who didn't agree with him. I want to talk about them, but in particular, I want to focus on Reb Shlomo Zalman's progression, because just like Reb Moshe started in one place and ended up somewhere different, over the progression of his tshuvas, over the 3-4 tshuvas that he progressed through, Reb Shlomo Zalman also had a similar evolution. It didn't end up in the same place as Reb Moshe, but he had a similar evolution. Now, I really want to. It's really a very fascinating story, Reb Shlomo Zalman's progression. So, let's talk. I don't know. I don't want to go out of order here. Okay, let's first start with the strong oistrum against Reb Moshe's shita, and then we'll get to Reb Shlomo Zalman. Now, in Reb Moshe, towards let's say the end of the 1970s, early 1980s, seemed to have came around and said that heart death is not the ultimate kaveya. Brain death is real. Clinical brain death is enough, and you could harvest the heart. Now, there were many poskim who didn't agree with him, but it was still emerging technology and emerging science. It wasn't a very common, prevalent shaila. And it was tumult about, but it wasn't something that poskim had to come up with strong opinions about. Now, in 1985, like we mentioned at the end of last week, the Rabbanut in Eretz Yisrael had a big get-together where they sat down, and in 1987 they published the Psakim, where they said that heart transplant is allowed under very narrow and specific conditions, proving, if you could prove that there's real brain death, real total and complete brain death, the Rabbanut allowed heart transplantation, and they said that one of their main primary sources was Reb Moshe's Psak. Now, there was definitely Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael who were invited to the Rabbanut's get-together, like Rabbi Yashiv and Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, the Gaivid of the Eda Charedis, and Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and the Tzitz Eliezer, and all of them, for one reason or another, did not attend these meetings of the Rabbanut. Maybe some of it's ideological, they didn't want to be part of the Rabbanut. Some of it's not. Some of it's halachic. But one way or the other, they all seemingly didn't agree with the Psak of the Rabbanut. Now, they didn't come out strongly against it either. They were just kind of quiet about it. Now, in 1990, some Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, more on the modern Orthodox side of the aisle, began to say that Reb Shlomo Zalman was maskim too, that heart transplants are okay. Even for Jews, even in Eretz Yisrael, heart transplants are okay. Now, this led to a big rash, and the Meyetzes Gedolei HaTorah of Agudas Yisrael in 1991 was very upset about this, and they sent the mishlachas of two Rabbanim to Eretz Yisrael to discuss it with Reb Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv. They sent Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky and Reb Feivel Kohn. These were the two Rabbanim that Meyetzes sent in 1991 to talk to Reb Shlomo Zalman to see what he held about it. And a lot of this you could see playing out, no one reads this anymore, but the Jewish Observer, it doesn't exist anymore, but the Jewish Observer in 1991, over the different issues of the Jewish Observer of that year, you could see this debate playing out, different letters to the editor, people writing articles in. Actually, Chaim David Zwiebel, Rabbi Mr. Chaim David Zwiebel, wrote an article in 1991, a long rebuttal against Rabbi Tendler. He now today is the Rosh Agudas Yisrael. This was a thing back then. Now they went to Eretz Yisrael to Reb Shlomo Zalman, and Reb Shlomo Zalman put out a psak, which we'll see in a second. But before I read you Reb Shlomo Zalman's psak, I want to first quote a little bit from Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, the Minchas Yitzchak's psak, Tzitz Eliezer's psak, and Shmuel Wozen's psak. Now the Minchas Yitzchak says something like this. He says as follows. He says, Muda ani. He says, I'm aware of this that you tell me. He says, Muda ani, I know. I'm a super. I'm aware of instances of certain gedolim who, even though they expressed their position saying that it's aser, later seem to have allowed it in certain circumstances. He's almost for certain talking about Moshe in this little piece over here. But he says, they were talking about it in the American hospital system, where the people who are donating the hearts are not Jews, and the sfeikis are not as severe, the shadow's not as chamer, and that's why Reb Moshe, he's not saying by name, but that's why these gedolim, even though they were on record as expressing some, reservations about this, allowed it to happen. Ulam, he says, Lavei kan b'artzeinu ha'kedosha, to come to Eretz Yisrael, levatzei davar neirah kazeh, to do something like this, like the Yehudim, on Jewish corpses, on Jewish bodies, there's a little slip over there, on Jewish people is certainly not allowed, he says, and I think that it's even murder. And he explains as follows. He says, why is it murder? He says, because take a patient who's in severe heart failure, right? Meaning someone who's in need of an organ transplant. He's in severe heart failure. Now, he's alive, right? This patient could be sitting in his bed, he's talking to his family, He's eating, he's drinking probably, he's doing whatever he's doing. He's very, very, very deathly ill, and he won't live very long. But he's alive right now. He says, so you come, you strap him to a bed, and you cut out his heart to put in a new heart. He says, that moment when you took out a perfectly beating heart that was keeping him alive, although it wasn't going to keep him alive forever, that's Ritzicha. You're telling me that you're going to replace it with a new heart. Who says that heart's going to work well? Who says it's going to take? Who's the thing? This is what he suggests. Now, it's a big chiddush to say this. It's a little bit of a shver svara to say this. But this is what he says. And maybe he doesn't mean it, in the most straightforward, way. Maybe he means it more, a little bit hyperbolically, a little bit to drive home the point. But Minchas Yitzchak says this, and therefore he says, Al Kain, Yesh lanu laharish elamas al zeh, b'li ches. We have to turn over the world to stop this. You have to make machaz, protests, turn over the world to make this end. This can't go on in Eretz Yisrael. There can't be such a rule that organ transplants, particularly hearts and things like that, could be allowed in Eretz Yisrael. He continues, he says, it's a chayva on us to stop it. Fine, that's his psak. Then Rav Wosner writes a psak similarly like that, and Tzitz Eliezer himself writes a psak like that. So some of the greatest poskim in Eretz Yisrael of the day, the Minchas Yitzchak, the Tzitz Eliezer, the Shevet HaLevi, all seem to be strongly saying that in Eretz Yisrael, where all the donors are Jews and all the receivers are Jews, you can't do heart transplants like this, it wouldn't be allowed. Now, Reb Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv were approached by Rav Feivel and Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky and asked about their opinion. In the 1990s, these were the preeminent poskim in Klal Yisrael. These are the two, most important poskim in Klal Yisrael at the time. And they published a short Gilui Das. It was published in the Ated, I think. It's dated Yud Beis Menachem Av Tafshin Nun Aleph. That's 1991. It says as follows. Nisvakashnu legalis daitenu. We were asked to express our view. Das Torah. Binyan hashtalas halev eshar ivarim. What would be the din about organ transplants and other ivarim? L'tzayir chayla mesukin bezman shalev hatarim payim. At a time when the donor's heart is still beating, i.e. it's connected to machines. There is brain death, but the donor's heart is still connected to machines. Kailul geza hamayach, the brain is totally dead. Eina misaket klal hanikra misas hamayach. The brain, the stem of the brain is totally dead. There is no blood flow to the brain, and the brain is totally dead. That's what the situation is. He says, Daiteinu, and here's the psak, she'ein shum heter l'hoitzi af echad minei ivarim. Our psak is that there is no heter to remove even a single one of the organs from this person. V'yesh bazeh mishum shvichas damim. And there is over here mishum shvichas damim. To take the heart from this person who's alive in the machines is shvichas damim. Mitzan Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Yosef Shalom Elyashiv. These are the two. Now this is a very, very important psak in 1991 that the Agudas Yisrael of America solicited from these poskim, saying clearly that they hold its aser. Now, what's very interesting is that Rosh Zalman himself, Rosh Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv again, in 1992, republished this psak, almost word for word the same. They publish it again, except at the end there's another sentence. It says, Al Kain, Al Kol Zeh Daitenu, She'ein Shum Heter L'Hoitzi Af Echad Minei Varim, V'yesh Bazeh Chshash Shvichas Damim. There's a chshash of shvichas damim. In the first one that they write, Yesh b'zeh mishum shvichas damim. This is shvichas damim. In the second one he writes, Reb Shlomo Zalman writes, and he's probably the writer of this nusach, Yesh b'zeh chshash shvichas damim. There's a chance that the shvichas damim. So what exactly happened? What's going on? What is this evolution? What's going on in Reb Shlomo Zalman's world while this is happening? So here's the backstory. In Eretz Yisrael at that time, there's this group, a small cadre of doctors, who are like pretty accomplished Talmidei Chachamim, who are also very accomplished doctors. But most of them, of this whole group, each one of them has published like several svarim. One is Professor Rabbi Dr. Avram Steinberg, who published the Encyclopedia for Medical Halacha, like a 7-volume sefer, a very serious sefer. Another one is Professor Dr. Avram Sefer Abraham, again put out 4 or 5 svarim on medical issues. Another one is Dr. Mordechai Halpern, who published a whole sefer on brain death and organ death and other svarim in medicine. And there's a few of these doctors. Now these doctors are very close to the Reb Shlomo Zalman. All of them are corresponding with him all the time. They're very in close contact with him. And when Reb Shlomo Zalman put out this psak that he said, Yesh by mishum ritzicha, this is shvichas damim to take the organs, these doctors came to Reb Shlomo Zalman's house and said about trying to change his mind. Why? Because medical science believes that once the brain is dead, totally dead, it is irreversible and the person is dead. Meaning you could, provided that you do the proper protocol and you do all the testing that's necessary, the brain is actually dead, it's irreversible. Although the Minchas Yitzchak in his Tshuva writes, Shamanu, we heard all sorts of stories of people who, even though they were brain dead, they came back alive, and I think everyone in the back of their mind has some sort of story like that in their head, but that's not real brain death. That's, a deep coma or locked-in syndrome or persistent vegetative state. There's all sorts of other brain ailments, which are almost full brain death, but not full brain death that exist. Full brain death is irreversible, and that's what the doctors believe. So they went to Reb Shlomo Zalman and they tried to convince him. Now Reb Shlomo Zalman heard them out, and he said, okay, I hear what you're saying. I think I'm willing to soften my position. And Rav Zalman wrote a little tshuva where he writes that he came across Rav Moshe's psak, and he was happy to see that Rav Moshe seemed to also come around and say that brain death is death. And even though he's not sure to be samech on it lemaisa, but he sees that there's some movement in that direction. Then Rav Zalman heard a story. This was a story that happened in those days. There was a woman who was 9 months pregnant, who was involved in a terrible accident. She came into the hospital totally brain dead. They were able to keep her body on life support for a little bit, and she was able to birth the baby. The baby came out alive. Now, Rav Zalman raised the problem as follows. He says, there's a Gemara in Erechin, on Daf Zayin and Aleph on the bottom of the Gemara. The Gemara says like this. I'm reviewing the Mashmul. Ha'isha hayotzes lihareg. A woman who's being taken out to be put to death. Mises Bezdin. Makin oisa keneged beis haroyin. We hit her on her stomach. Kadesh yamas havlad tchila. So the baby should die first. Kadesh leitavili de nivel. So it shouldn't come to some sort of nivel and some sort of disgusting situation. So frak the Gemara, remember the he kadmo mesa bereisha? You mean to tell me that there's a potential that the mother will die first and the baby in utero will still be alive after the mother was put to death? We know we know always the child dies first, the pregnancy dies first, because an uber in utero is very sensitive to the mother, and if the blood pressure is dropping in the mother, the baby's going to die first. So the Gemara says no. That's only regarding death. Since the Vlad is very little bit alive, he's not even fully alive on his own, the over, so he dies first. Aval Nerga, someone who's put to death, he may separation, she could die first, and therefore we have to, kill the baby first. This is a din, gory din that the Gemara in Erechin says. Now says Rav Zalman Azai. You see, it's a clear Gemara, it's a Mefurish Gemara, that anytime there's a baby in utero and there's a mother and they die, the mother dies, the baby always dies first. The mother. There's no such a thing as the mother being dead and the baby being alive. So says Rav Zalman, if you present me, what's it?
Unless she gets killed.
Hang on. So says Rav Zalman, if you present me a case of a woman who came into the hospital, a car accident, let's say, and her brain seems to be dead, but her organs are being kept alive by a machine, and her baby is able to be birthed normally afterwards, that tells me that Kozman, her heart is beating, she isn't dead yet. Because if she was dead, the baby would be dead also. Elamai, the fact that her heart is beating indicates to us that heart death is what's keveya. And as long as the heart is beating, the mother's still alive. So said Rav Zalman, I take back all softening that I was going towards brain death, and I say, unless you could resolve to me this Gemara in Erechin, I can't give Zechayitz over here. I don't know what to do for you.
How does the killing thing work different than the dying?
So 1 second, let's. These are all very good points. You're all getting at the Nakuda. So now, what these doctors did is they suggested, a bunch of doctors. They suggested a medical experiment of Rav Zalman as follows. They gathered together a team of veterinary doctors in a prominent veterinary hospital in Eretz Yisrael. They put together a whole team of surgeons, and they took a pregnant sheep, I think it's called a ewe. Right, I think. Who's my farmer? You don't know? Oh, okay. Pregnant sheep. Pregnant sheep? Okay, so they brought a pregnant sheep in there, and they connected the sheep to machines, so that the machines would keep the heart and everything pumping, the blood pumping, everything alive. And then they opened up the neck, and they severed the arteries that bring blood to the brain, totally, capped them off, severed the arteries. And to just make sure that they really achieved the full brain death, they took a vacuum and sucked out the whole brain from the cavity of the sheep. Now, you have a fully dead sheep in front of you. It's missing its brain. The brain's not even in there. You can't tell me it's not, it's going to get up and walk. The brain's not in there. And they were able to keep the baby inside in utero alive for several hours. Now, they monitored it, and the heart rate, everything was stable, everything was fine, everything was perfect. Everything was fine. Then they decided to take it to another level, and they decided to try to birth the sheep they tried to birth the sheep. They made a cesarean section, they made an incision to try to take it out, and the sheep came out dead. The baby sheep came out dead. So now they were confused, because mitzad echad, they clearly showed the sheep was alive, and they were monitoring the baby's heartbeat all along, and it was alive, but something went wrong and it died. So they weren't sure what to do with this. So they made a second test, and they also decided to up the ante. They decided like this. They took a pregnant sheep in, and they strapped it in. They made a trach what's it called? Like they put a trach in low down along the neckline, and then they severed the entire head. Chainsaw, head is off. Sealed it up, because we don't want messes when we're doing these experiments. And again, they kept the heart, the sheep alive on a machine. The heart of the baby and the mother was pumping strong. And suddenly, 20 minutes in, the baby's heart rate dropped like precipitously, and the baby died. So they ran it again. They did a third test. And in the third test, they were able to keep the mother and the baby alive long enough to birth the baby, and the baby's on a farm in Eretz Yisrael. Alive and regular like any other sheep. They kept...
To be shawarma.
No, the mother might be shawarma. I don't know. They kept the... Mother's sweetbreads, and exactly, but... No, so what they did is they proved to Rav Shlomo Zalman, that the Gemara says, that the mother always dies first, and the baby doesn't die first, that's not... With modern medicine, that isn't true anymore. With modern medicine, you're able to keep the heart pumping artificially in a way that it isn't really dead, even if it's dead. Meaning it's not a riot to any life. There's no life left in the sheep because the brain's gone, the head is gone, it's cut off. Now, what's the proof? So they said as follows. There's a Mishnah in it's in Idis also, but there's a Mishnah in Alis, in Perak Aleph Mishnah Vav, that says as follows. Hutaz harosh, if the head of a human is chopped off, afal pi shehem nefarchasin, even though they're twitching and flailing around like a chicken without a head, they're considered dead. Just like the zan of halita, like a sheretz, where you chop it off and it still flails around. So you have a Mefurish Mishnah saying that once the head is severed, once the head is cut off, that is death l'chaladeis. So now what they presented to Rav Zalman is you have a stira. You have the Mishnah in Allah saying that the sheep is dead. You have what you're extracting from the Gemara in Erech saying the sheep is alive. Elamai, you have to say that in the modern world where you're able to keep the sheep alive artificially, that's not what the Gemara in Erech is talking about. And like you validly pointed out, essentially that could be read into the Gemara itself. The Gemara says there's a difference between a sudden death and a not so sudden death, so you could say that's the same difference over here. Meaning if there's some sort of unnatural death that hacks off the head...
Isn't the whole Gemara saying that
there's more than one way...
Let's
leave it. It's not... There's more than one way to skin this sheep. There's more than one way to skin the sheep, but essentially you could definitely make an argument. Now, Rav Shlomo Zalman heard this, he was very partial to this argument. Rav Shlomo Zalman liked this argument a lot. And he said, okay, so fine. So if you resolve my kasha from the Gemara in Erechin and from the occurrence of a woman being able to birth a baby after she's brain dead, so now I see that brain death could really be death, and I'm willing to consider brain death. But now Rav Shlomo Zalman had a new problem. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, I can't be certain with modern testing that the brain death is really dead unless you do all these tests, right? When someone presents as brain dead to the doctor, they need to do a whole protocol of tests. Now the halacha is that this is Gepaskin in Shulchan Aruch. It's Mefurish. What do you say?
Our sheep with the head off.
Yeah.
How's that dead?
It doesn't have a head. Hutas Aresh is dead.
I understand, but the sheep is still alive.
No, the heart is working. It's artificial. It's artificial. It's like it's in a refrigerator with a pump. It's artificial. Hutas Aresh is dead. That's Mefurish Mishnah. There's no chelik on that. Hutas Aresh is dead. Rav Moshe says this also. Rav Moshe, when he talks about heart, that calls it Hutas Aresh. Now, so Rav Shlomo Zalman had a different problem. He says the halach in Shulchan Aruch is that a geisis, anyone who's in the matzav of gesisa, they're almost dead, you're not even allowed to touch them. Because if you touch them, you don't know what could cause. Maybe you're killing them quicker. So says Rav Shlomo Zalman, you proved almost to the point that brain death is death, but since in order to actually ascertain that the brain is completely dead, you need to run a whole battery of testing, and in order to run the battery of testing, you have to touch them, so it's a catch-22. You're almost certain that they're dead, but you can't touch them, because it's a suffix. So Rav Shlomo Zalman said, my ending position is, it's a suffix mei suffix geisis. And since it's a suffix mei suffix geisis, it's either someone who's mamish in the throes of death or actually dead, you can't touch them, you can't prove it. If you can't prove it, you can't be semach. So says Rav Shlomo Zalman, and that's why he revised his words, yesh be'chshash shvichas damim. It has a chshash of shvichas damim. It's not yesh be'mishum shvichas damim. There's a chshash. It's a suffix.
So if someone's already hooked up to the machines, then it wouldn't be a problem.
So 1 second. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, if you're in America, or you're in a place where they don't care about halacha, and they're violating these rules anyway, and a person is hooked up to the heart machine, and they ran the whole protocol of tests, and they proved that the brain is dead, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman, you'd be able to take the heart. So now says Rav Shlomo Zalman, Americans or Israelis who want to come to America, if they'd be able to, it's very hard to get on the list if you're not a citizen, but could get a heart from some donor in America because no problem. They're not being geiris the din of a geisis, so it's just a suffix geisis, suffix mace. You have nothing to worry about, you can take the heart. But in Eretz Yisrael, where everyone's Jewish and the din of geisis applies and you're not allowed to touch, says Rav Shlomo Zalman, there's nothing to do, you're stuck. It's a sticky situation. So you end up having, let's say, to summarize, I guess, you have, let's say, 3.5 shittas about the heart transplants, right? You have Rav Moshe Shita, which is evolving. He starts off saying that it's usher, then eventually he comes around to say that brain death is death, and it seems to allow it. You have the Rabbanut that follows Rav Shlomo Zalman, says brain death is death, and they allow it even in Eretz Yisrael, right? They say even in Eretz Yisrael, brain death is death. Then you have the Paiskim like the Shevet HaLevi and the Minchas Yitzchak and the Tzitz Eliezer, who say it's mamash ritzicha, to take the heart out of the live person is mamash ritzicha. We don't trust brain death. They go with the Chacham Tzvi and the Chacham Sefer, and they say it's not considered death, can't touch it at all. Then you have Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rabbi Yashiv, probably, who seem to have like a middle way. They're conceding to the point that probably brain death is death, They hold that the Gemara in Erechin is resolved, and the Mishnah in Olis takes precedent. But Afal Pikein, it's a suffix, geis, suffix mace, you're not allowed to touch it, and therefore it's only mutter in circumstances where people are not following halacha anyhow. So, to summarize, if the shaila actually comes up, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. I just think it's very interesting because I don't think that there's many examples of a rabbi, a posek, for sure not of Rabbi Shem Zalman's stature, like directing medical experimentation on this level. Like this is fascinating. This is like a sci-fi type of stuff. Like bringing sheep and cutting off the heads. It's a not much a fascinating experience. It really shows you a little bit like the depth of commitment, meaning how far down the rabbit hole Rabbi Shem Zalman wanted to go to really figure out like what this is in the most practical of senses. Meaning it's a real like the Muslim is achrayus to the halacha, meaning how far he was willing to go. Anyway, I think we're done the sugya of heart transplants. We'll have to see what's next. No plans.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.